Hello and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie. Since 2002, the Center for Judaic, Holocaust and Peace Studies has played an integral role on the campus of Appalachian State University. The goal of the center is to increase tolerance and understanding through the exploration of Jewish culture and history. And at a time when we see world tensions bringing a new wave of antisemitism and violence, the work of the center is now more important than ever. My guest today, Amy Hudnall, directs the center during this challenging time and is joining us to outline what the center does and how its presence on campus serves the university and surrounding community. Welcome, Amy.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you've been around Appalachian a long time. You were a student here and have now been teaching for some time. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your history here at the university?
Well, one of the neat things about being tapped to be the director of the center or the interim director is that I was in Rennie Brandt's and Zahara Boyd's very first Holocaust class.
Oh, really?
So yeah, I stayed with them and helped to start the center, and then went into teaching full time in the history department, and then added global studies to that, and then I continued to teach classes for the center, and then it came back around to me being the director. My specialty, I am a historian by trade, but I specialize in genocide. And then kind of as a secondary specialty is peace studies, because the center needed somebody to teach peace studies. So I learned about peace studies. Yeah. Most of my recent work is in studying perpetrators from genocide. I created a database of interviews looking at things like health, life stability, marriage stability, children, and their general belief or general comments when they're talking to somebody they trust about their roles in a genocide.
Oh, my goodness. I want to come back to that and let you talk a little more about that. But I wanted to also point out that you've won awards for teaching and advising here, so you've been a very impactful faculty member. And I didn't know that you were in that first class that Rennie and Zahara taught. And, of course, when you name those names, people here know those names. And tell us a little bit about the history of the center, because I guess those two were the ones who were responsible for getting this up and going.
Yeah.
And I've got a picture of Rennie and Zahara here, so we can put that on the screen.
That always makes me smile.
Yeah.
So Rennie Brandt's was in the history department. Zahara Boyd was in the English department. Rennie was teaching Holocaust classes. Zoe was teaching a literature and Holocaust class. They got together and they were like, let's put our class together. And they started teaching in the honors department. And it grew from there. We have a strong Jewish community here. And when they realized what was happening, they linked up with what Rennie and Zoe were doing. And then later, Rosemary Horowitz from the English department also joined. And they ultimately started a symposium, one of the first symposiums in the country for teaching middle school and high school teachers how to teach the Holocaust. We've been doing this symposium now. This year will be our 22nd year. And that all started with Rennie and Zoe.
This is Rennie, of course, and former town mayor as well.
That's right.
Unfortunately, we lost him recently.
Yes.
And Zahara Boyd, I think we have a photograph of her as well. And she's faculty emeritus, I believe.
Yes.
Faculty emerita.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about Zahara.
You know, I don't, she keeps a lot of things close to the vest.
Yeah.
But she was a child survivor of the Holocaust. She was a hidden child. So there's different categories of how people experience the Holocaust. And her father smuggled they were in Warsaw, Poland, smuggled the whole family out of the ghetto. They didn't look Jewish, so they got false papers, and lived in the city as regular Nazis.
Yeah.
But Zohara looked Jewish, so he was a judge, and she ended up living at his secretary's house in a closet most of the time, or under a table where no one would know that she was there. And I don't know how many years she was there, but it was significant, because he figured out pretty quickly. He was counting the trains coming back from Auschwitz, and he figured out pretty quickly that people weren't coming back, that it wasn't what they said it was. And that was when he was like, I've got to get my family out. And they all survived.
What a story.
Pretty amazing.
It is amazing. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get to your research here, but I want to mention one other thing about you that I find really interesting. You ran a horse rescue farm in the high country for a long time. How did you get started with that?
I did dog rescue for years.
Oh, okay.
And I moved onto a farm, and I was like, oh, I need to do horse rescue.
You have the space, and right?
Yeah, I was like, I've got the space. And the person who was running the rescue here was leaving town, and she's like, hey, you got a farm now. How about you take over? And full that I was.
Yeah,
I did.
It sounds like a lot of work.
It ended up, we lasted for about 20 years, and it was $250,000 a year. We saved a lot of horses.
That's incredible.
And we did a lot of teaching throughout that process. I can't get away from it.
Yeah. You are a teacher at heart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we had at-risk youth, and we did a lot of work with youth from ASU. We did workshops on conflict resolution with the horses. We had people who were on probation that came, and we did lessons on people who were charged with animal abuse, on how to not do it. I mean, we did a lot.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, let's talk about your research a little bit. Your work on genocide and trauma theory, and you mentioned most recently you've been interested in interviewing perpetrators involved in genocide. What have you found from that, and how? I mean, I know it's a big question, asking a lot, but results have been really shocking and pretty clear. The majority of perpetrators do not feel guilt for what they did. They feel sadness for not having completed the job. Really?
And it's terrifying. You know, I wanted to believe when I went into it that, oh, these are people that are traumatized. They need help. They'll change their behavior if they get the help. We need to be thoughtful and mindful. And no, they live in the world and are seemingly normal. I don't think that belief is normal, which is why I say seemingly normal.
Right.
But, they have good marriages. Generally, where you find a dissolution in behavior, it's in the second generation. So the children fall apart and have, anxiety, depression, suicide, other kinds of illnesses. But the perpetrators, they don't beat their wives. I mean, it's just bizarre. It's scarily.
What do you make of that? I mean, it's just
I don't.
Well, my first reaction was surely this is some sort of elaborate defense mechanism that they can't come to grips with what they've done. But it sounds like to me that that's not the case after hearing you describe that.
I don't think it is.
Okay.
And we have. I'm not doing the interviews myself. I'm taking other people's interviews and then dissecting them.
Right.
And putting them in the data. So I've got hundreds of people from Rwanda, Holocaust, Bosnia, Sudan, Cambodia, Indonesia, and the results are the same. It's just like their human response. They aren't sociopaths. And I can't speculate. Maybe somebody else can take it further, but for me, the results at this point are the best I can do. I just can't begin to speculate what that tells us about humanity.
Mm. You also are working with interviews of bystanders, not active perpetrators, but I guess people who might be in a position to stop some of the horrors of genocide and don't. Do you get the same kind of results from those interviews?
No. And I haven't done as much work with that group. I tend to take a hard line personally.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my students and I debate a lot. But I don't really believe there's a bystander.
Mm.
I think we make choices, and to not act is a choice. And fear certainly can be part of it. And it's something that I kind of am seeing right now with the rise in anti-Semitism. We can choose to stand up for people when we see something bad happening, or we can be scared and not act.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at some point you have to come to grips with yourself and you have to make a choice.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about the rise of anti-Semitism since you mentioned it. Do you see a rise in anti-Semitism in our current situation over time since the mid-20th century, or all of the above, or is it playing out differently in our current culture than it has in the past? Maybe you can comment a little bit on that.
I mean, we've been seeing a rise of anti-Semitism in like the last 10 years, but it's been slow. It does seem to be kind of picking up momentum. And I honestly attribute it to the rise of lots of, I can't think of the word, our use of violent language.
Mm-hmm.
And the acceptance of our use of violent language that's been happening in the last 5 or 6 years. I really think that that's a big part of, it kind of gives us permission,
right,
to be violent about those things we were already sort of thinking about, and it comes to the fore. Since October 7th, there has been almost about a 350% rise in anti-Semitic acts since October 7th. And I'm sorry.
Is this in the United States or worldwide? Globally. Okay. Yep.
That's the events in Israel and Palestine don't warrant that kind of just insane increase in anti-Semitism, unless the possibility that it's been there all along. And that was, again, just giving permission to be able to be public about the things you've already been thinking. We also have seen in the last 5 years, it's not just a rise in anti-Semitism, but the white supremacy that covers a wide range, but kind of at the root is anti-Semitism. The groups that are getting more membership are the groups that are the more violent. And we should all be concerned about that.
We should all be scared about that, yeah. So it sounds like in your perspective here, there's kind of a combination of cultural factors that have kind of pulled back the covers, I guess, or opened the curtain on something that was already there in our society and in our culture.
I'm not sure I want to own that.
Okay.
Only because as someone who tries really hard to be a better person, I don't believe that.
Okay.
Maybe it's true.
Yeah.
It does seem to be indicated, but I'm not going to come out and say that as a fact. I just can't.
Well, that's good. You have to look optimistically, I guess, at the human race, or you lose all hope, huh?
Yeah. Exactly.
So this is all the more reason that centers like yours are important to educate about not only the horrors of the Holocaust and genocide in general, but the hope for peace. And earlier you mentioned your interests were in genocide, and then you had to sort of pivot to peace studies. Can you kind of articulate what the difference in those two areas are, and then how they intersect in the academic community?
That's an interesting question. Everybody I know in the field of genocide, we're doing what we're doing because we want there to never be another genocide.
Right.
But we're trying to parse out the details about why they happen and understand why they happen and the events, and be, academic in the sense that, we don't take a position and here's the information and you can do with it what you want to.
Mm-hmm.
Peace studies isn't quite like that. So in a way, I know Zoe and Rennie, one of the reasons it started out as Judaic Holocaust Center,
mm-hmm.
and then it was like, but we study these things because we want people to live more peacefully.
Right.
And so we have to add the peace studies. So there is that intrinsic connection between genocide and peace studies, because ultimately that's what we all want,
mm-hmm.
is more peace. It's a different way of knowing and learning. Peace is more practitioner-based. We're not teaching people how not to do genocide or how to do genocide.
I get it.
But in peace studies, I'm teaching people how, you got to breathe and be patient because it's going to come at its own time. You have to give it time. You have to do this. It's very practitioner-based.
I see.
So I think that's probably the even though they're intrinsically connected, they're very different.
That's really a really helpful articulation of how they interact and how they're different as well. Thank you. So let's talk about the center a little bit. I know you mentioned the summer symposium earlier, and a lot of what you do is programming.
Mm-hmm.
So in the summer symposium, which you said has been going on for how many years?
22
years. So you bring in high school teachers from around North Carolina and train them how to deal with the Holocaust and how to teach it. That must be really important to these teachers, I would think, because they're having to deal with a topic that is sensitive but important for them to include in the curriculum. Do you hear back from them afterwards? They go back into the high schools, and what are some of the comments they have?
I mean, the symposium is life-changing. And I hear that year after year, that everything that they do in terms of teaching, they do differently from a different frame of reference because we're bringing trauma into it. We're teaching them how to deal with traumatic materials in a way that doesn't create harm. We're teaching experiential learning. We're teaching all kinds of pieces that go with the evidentiary pieces about the Holocaust, and it's changing how they look at everything. That students have to have time to reflect. You got to give them time to breathe. That comes from the peace studies. You got to breathe.
Yeah.
And so I hear from, good example, the co-director now, Lee Holder. He went through this like 20 years ago. He went through the symposium. So, and we have people that come back year after year. I think it's really important. We also, we're bringing in people from Central Europe now through the State Department. We have people
to participate in the symposium.
Yeah, and people coming from Florida, from Alabama. We've had people from New Jersey. Somebody coming from Connecticut, I think, just signed up. Yeah. So we get people from all over. And then our speakers now are big. We have a lot of middle-of-the-road speakers, but we have 2 or 3 that are internationally known.
Right.
And so that's exciting because we're bringing to Boone, seemingly little Boone, people that would never have come here before.
Yeah.
And so the community comes to a lot of things, as well as faculty here and other people. So it's really powerful.
Yeah. It sounds like it's life-changing. I mean, you mentioned that Lee Lee Holder, came to a symposium and now is the co-director. You took a class with Rennie and Zoe, and now you're the director. I mean, it's life-changing.
Those kinds of stories come over and over again.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting is that as of this year, North Carolina has passed a law that requires that the Holocaust be taught in English and social studies classes, starting in middle grades up through high school. So teachers who never wanted to, never thought about it, could have cared less, are now put in a position that they've got to do it.
Wow.
And if they don't do it right, it can be incredibly harmful.
Right. So this might even expand going forward with this new law.
Yeah.
Well, I was kind of nosing around your website a little bit, and I was looking at the symposium. I got a couple of pictures, photographs that maybe we can show up here. It's not all hard work. It looks like you guys are having some fun here with some music and some cultural events. I think some next photo shows you dancing, and I think this is all during the symposium.
It is. And that's the fun thing about the symposium. There's workshops where they end up writing lesson plans, and we have speakers, but we have things like this. So we're teaching about Judaism. They go to the temple here and go to the Shabbat service, and last year they were just blown away by the Shabbat service. They get to eat with everybody at the temple and have a traditional Jewish oneg meal. This was a klezmer band, and klezmer music comes from Central Europe, from the Pale, and they were telling stories and jokes and teaching about klezmer music. So this was all really important to understanding Judaism, but it was fun.
The klezmer band local? Or
No,
you brought
they
them?
came from New York.
Oh, that's okay. All right. So the center maintains a pretty active relationship with the local Jewish temple and the community. Could you describe a little bit about how your outreach to the temple works and what sort of outreach you might have to the larger Jewish community in the area?
Okay. We have this really unusual thing that, in fact, one of the founders of the center, in terms of helping financially, Molly Grad, made the comment that she believed the center needed to be here. She used to come up for summers. She believed the center needed to be here because there were no Jewish people and all these Christians, and that people needed to know about Jewish people. So they, Beach Mountain in particular, is a huge place of pilgrimage every summer for Jewish people from Florida primarily. And they've been coming up here for 30 years, like lots of people. And they ultimately started a temple. It met at different churches. I think it met at St. Elizabeth's.
I think you're right.
I know it met at St. Luke's for a while. And then ultimately it grew to the point that they built a physical building and began to have a rabbi come periodically, like once a month. And it kept growing, and it kept growing. And now when I'm there, it's full. I mean, like bursting at the seams, and children running everywhere. All the things you think of in a religious center that you want, right? You want children, you want it to be vibrant and exciting, and people be happy and be thinking about their religion and accepting each other. The temple accepts the college students. It's remarkable. Lots of non-Jewish students that end up there because it's so welcoming. The rabbi is a cantor. He was in theater and music before he became a rabbi. So the services are theatrical and they are musical and wonderful. It's just a really good place to be. And we work well together. We kind of support each other, even though we remain independent of one another. They support our events. We support their events. We work together politically when we think we need to. And it's been an amazing relationship. We have a liaison, Michael Berkowitz, between the temple and the center, and he and I meet once a month, and he reports to the temple. So they've helped me find speakers for the symposium. It's a wonderful relationship.
That's incredible. That's wonderful. Now, you not only bring people into this symposium, but you're sending students out too. I think you got a study abroad program going on. Can maybe as we wind down here, say something about that, because it sounds wonderful.
We have been doing an annual study abroad, either to Israel or to like Poland and Germany. And they're usually about 8 days. They're all paid for. They are chosen actually from students in our Holocaust classes. And we co-teach with teachers out of Western Galilee College in Israel. So that's a really fun relationship. We have Arab and Israeli students and American students all in one class by Zoom. And, just fascinating discussions and cultural sharing. And then we choose the recipients of the scholarships to the study abroad come out of those classes. They are, last year's, I keep saying it's life-changing. It was life-changing for them. It was remarkable. We went to Auschwitz, we went to Krakow, we went to Berlin, and the only thing they didn't like, which I thought was really funny, was the train. To me, I'm like, you have to ride a train. Everybody has to ride a train. It was boring.
Really?
Oh, yeah, too slow. They never looked out the window. I was so mad at them. I was like, what are you doing? Look out the window. And they weren't doing it.
Busy on their screen.
Yep. Yep. So, the train was a flop, but everything else was fantastic.
And you're going to continue to do that, right? Yes. So just in a few seconds, where is the center headed from here? What's the future like?
Oh, great things. Yeah. We have more events. We're going to be bringing in visiting scholars. We're looking at bringing a journal in. And we're trying to expand our minor, and we are also looking at taking the minor to Hickory. So there's a lot of things in the offing. Yeah,
a journal.
Mm-hmm.
That's exciting. So
it is exciting.
That would be another position in the center, I guess. You'd have an editor, or would that be? Probably not.
It's academia. But we've been looking at journals. We looked at one that was in psychohistory, and we're looking at one on human dignity and humiliation. They work under the premise that all violence comes from humiliation. And so, a journal would be, I've run multiple journals, so it would be a really easy thing to do.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your service to the center and your wonderful teaching, but also your time here today. This has been very informative.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Come back sometime. Okay. Until next week, this is Ozzie Ostwald. I hope you'll join us again here on Religion and Life and App TV as we continue to explore the relationship between religion, culture, and society. Thank you, Amy, and thank you, viewers. This is Ozzie Ostwald. Until next week.